Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Daily Debate. My name is Ahmed Nader, and tonight the main topic for the Daily Debate would be focusing on the breakthroughs for the Egyptian economy in the past year, and more specifically in 2022, the first and the second quarters, as we will be discussing the hikes in the non-oil exports which took place in the first part of the year for the first 6 months, to say the least, which hit about 19.35 billion American dollars in the space of 6 months. And in the same period, the growth rates of the Egyptian economy, they hit about 7.8%. With expectations to be through the whole year of 2022 to be amounting to 6.2% of growth year on year. And we will be starting straight away with the main top stories which took place today in Egypt. One of them comes through the presidential activities of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, as President al-Sisi expressed keenness on boosting the role of the judicial power in the African societies. The President's remarks came during his talks with the Presidents of the Constitutional and the Supreme Courts and the African Constitutional Councils in Cairo for the 6th high-level meeting. President al-Sisi asserted the significance of the judicial efforts that have gained more importance in light of the challenges facing the African countries. The meeting is hosted by the Supreme Constitutional Court. Addressing the opening session, Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli said that Africa is an important part of the world, pointing out to the current challenges facing the continent and called for support to face the impact of its crises. He also called on all the African countries to preserve the natural resources of the Black Continent and to enhance the joint cooperation at the aim of achieving the African sustainable development in all domains. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister praised the outcome of the previous editions of the African Judicial Chiefs meeting in developing the joint judicial work in Africa. And the second item of the top stories for the Daily Debate for today, they come from the preparations for the COP27, which will be held here in Egypt, more specifically in Sharm el-Sheikh in the month of November, and Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli inspecting those preparations as the Prime Minister Madbouli resumed the visit to Sharm el-Sheikh to follow up on the preparations for the climate change conference, the COP27, that is due to be held in November. During the visit, Madbouli announced that the preparation process will be finished in a month at a high level of efficiency upon the directives of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Madbouli is set to review a number of projects in South Sinai, in addition to meeting the investors. In regard to the state's efforts to promote tourism, he reiterated that the smart taxi system will be applied for the first time in Egypt to secure the tourists and the visitors in the Red Sea resort. The Prime Minister stated that this year's conference will be attended by double the numbers of the participants in previous conferences due to the Egyptian good status in hosting the world gatherings and the important events. Also during the visit, Madbouli was briefed with the latest measures carried out ahead of the conference by the South Sinai Governor Khaled. Fouda asserted the government's unlimited support and the efficient cooperation between the private sector and the international institutions in this regard. Fouda reviewed the progress report of a number of ongoing projects in the city, where he said that 30 projects have been implemented. He also reviewed the latest measures taken to transform Sharm el-Sheikh to a green, sustainable and smart city during the coming period. Later in the day, Madbouli inspected the projects of water and sewage in South Sinai, where he listened to a brief on the strategic water tanks project, which consists of 8 tanks with a capacity of 80,000 cubic meters to serve 40,000 citizens. We will be heading to the first report of the daily debate for tonight. As I mentioned, the breakthroughs of the Egyptian economy that took place in the first 6 to 9 months of the year, and more specifically the first quarter and the second quarter of 2022. We've had the hike in the non-oil exports to be reaching about 19.35 billion American dollars in the same period, and a growth rate of about 7.8%. So stay tuned.
The Egyptian economy recorded a growth rate of 7.8% during the first 9 months of the current fiscal year, July 2021 to March 2022, compared to 1.9% during the same period of the previous year. Minister of Planning and Economic Development Dr. Khaled said that the growth rate during the third quarter of the current fiscal year has reached 5.4%. The minister expected the real growth rate to reach 6.2% by the end of the fiscal year 2021-2022, driven by the growth spurt achieved in the first 9 months. Said pointed out that there was a noticeable improvement in all economic activities during the 9 months, as the leading sectors of growth were the tourism sector, which witnessed a growth of 62.8%, telecommunications by 16.4%, the Suez Canal by 13%, the manufacturing industry by 10.3%, and construction and building at a rate of 8.2%. In this context, Said clarified the sectors that contributed the most to the GDP during both the third quarter and the first 9 months of the current fiscal year, as they contributed 61% of the total output, are manufacturing, trade, extractions, and real estate activities and agriculture sectors. The transportation movement through the Suez Canal has grown in light of the increase in the movement of transportation and navigation through the canal after the closure of many shipping lanes in Northern Europe, with the development of construction work and the navigation services provided. She pointed out that the unemployment rates during the third quarter of the fiscal year 2021-2022 fell to 7.2% compared to 7.4% during the third quarter of the last fiscal year. The minister indicated that the inflation rate increased from 8% in January 2022 to 14.9% in April 2022 on an annual basis, and that foreign exchange reserves decreased to reach $37.1 billion. Despite that, this value is sufficient to cover about 6 months of commodity imports. She also touched on recording an increase in the trade balance deficit by 13% during the first half of the current fiscal year, as non-oil imports rose by 28.1%, and in contrast, non-oil exports increased by 37.6% during the same period.
Welcome back. You're still watching the daily debate. As we have seen in the past report and following it, a number of statistics provided by the Cabinet's Information and the Decision-Making Centre by the Cabinet. I'm honoured to be having with me in the studio for tonight to be shedding more light on the statistics that we have seen and the investment climate and the economic situation in Egypt in general in the past year, and more specifically in 2022, is Dr. Khaled, Dahawy, the Professor of Accounting at the American University in Cairo. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime. First of all, how would you see the economic situation in Egypt nowadays?
Well, I have to say that we all can see that there is a spike in the economic performance in the past part of the 2022, spearheaded by a dramatic change in the monetary policy, by the change of the head of the central bank that led to a lot of freedom and flexibility in the market of the monetary, especially exchange rate, interest rates, and so on, that have led to an increase in the operations that is opposite to what we have seen in the past couple of years, where there was tried to contract the market and make it shrink as much as possible to decrease the demand on the foreign exchange dollar and so on, and foreign currency. On the other side, as has been mentioned several times, we see a change in the political climate, with the President Fattah Sisi call for 100 target, or putting a target for the government, which is always very important to set a target to where do you want to be, because a lot of times we get so focused on the current situation of fighting the fires, and we don't have a target. Once you have a target, you have KPIs, and then you have an accountability system that sets, we have to reach this target, why or why didn't we reach that target? So I think it's very important because it sets, in a sense, that export is a priority for the government, for Egypt,
yes,
for our economic survival. Number two, it sets the target, as we said, and it sets a plan to reach that. Then comes the different tools that will get us to that plan. And we see a lot of change in the focus of export also to non-oil exports, because in the past we've had exports, so they've always been focused on oil products, or the majority of it has been on oil products. So the focus, or the change of focus in itself, and setting targets by the leadership in the country, shows a change in the political will and political policies that will trickle down onto the investment, the economic, and the financial policies that are happening. And we've also seen that in the sense that we've seen a major increase in non-oil exports in the past, I would say, 2 quarters of the year.
You've mentioned a very important point that took place in the past maybe 2 to 3 weeks, a month. The change of personnel in terms of the governor of the central bank, for example. The change of personnel, do you think, would be leading to a change of strategy on the long term? Can we be seeing that for the upcoming years, maybe starting from 2023 and onwards?
Of course. I think the change of personnel have shown already. The new personnel, Dr. Hassan Abdullah, who started taking over the role, has a lot of expertise in the area of banking. And he has also done something that hasn't been done before. He has also surrounded himself by 2 experts from the banking industry to support him and his vision. I always believe that change is important.
Yes.
In accounting, in auditing, in general, we talk about rotation. Because if you are the best person in the world and you stay for such a long time in a position, after a while, this is how much you can offer. We always need new blood, we always need new vision and new strategies. And by that change and the names that are the new change in the central bank have definitely added a lot of information because of their wealth and breadth of their background. You look at the CIB, you look at the Al-Arabi Al-Afriqi, these are the banks that they're coming from, and you see 2 very big industrial hubs in Egypt, financial hubs, I'm sorry, in Egypt. Each have a different policy and each have a different status. Combining these thoughts together is very important. And changing the thoughts from the previous governor, whether you agree or disagree with him, just changing and seeing new strategies is very important.
To be setting a target, as you mentioned, Dr. President Assisi saying we need $100 billion, that is the target. For how many years do you think we need to be reaching that target?
To be realistic, I don't think before 4 or 5 years. I think sometimes we also try to jump the gun. We sometimes try to make it a rosy path, but in reality, it's a very vicious market. The international market is. There are countries that are ahead of us, and we need to compete. We need to change dramatically. We need to move to more sustainable growth and more sustainable quality. Because one of the things that we have had a problem with is not just simply the production, but actually sustainable quality of production. We produce things, but they're not up to the quality of what the market wants. And the second thing is we've always been pioneers in our minds in what we want to produce and export. So we would choose a product that we want to export. The world has dramatically changed from that model. Today, there are big companies that will tell you what is the required product in what market that you want to enter. I was consulting with a firm, and they go to the extent of if you want to export glass cups, for example, the degree of clarity of the glass used, the material, the transparency of the cup, all of these have regulations. You can't just produce what you have and then say, I'm going to export it. You have to do a lot of research. I was very happy to see, for example, that our ministry just is planning 25 international export exhibitions across the world to show what we have. But also we need to start studying what the market wants. It's not what we produce, it's what the market wants. So this is very important. The second thing is we need to learn from the competitors, because we have very strong competition. And we need to understand that it's going to be a long road. Another thing that I think is very important is, and I've seen also that there is a focus, but I haven't seen it in export, is focusing more on Africa. Africa is a virgin market. A lot of people are fighting for it. It might be a lot easier to export to Africa and some to the Arab world than trying to compete into Europe and the other more upper level countries that require very high restrictions and very high standards to be able to export to. So that at least would help us in increasing the volume at that time.
To be studying the global markets, to know what they need, not just what we can offer. What do you think the world needs from Egypt nowadays and we can offer sufficiently?
I think one of the things that we need to be very careful with is services. We focus too much on industrial and agricultural exports. And we've taken major strides. But I think services is a very important place. Software, hubs for call centers. These is where we have a definite advantage in Egypt in terms of they depend on human power. We have plenty of that. However, we have to make sure that we train well and provide vocational training for people who are going to be handling these things. But services is definitely a lot easier to export if we can enter that market. To give you an example from our area of the world, which is accounting, India today exports service of accounting bookkeeping for the world, where the company is in Dubai, the company is in the US, UK, but its accounting department is in Dubai.
India.
In India. So all of these are thinking outside of the box and finding a niche where you can actually export services that you have an advantage in.
So speaking on the other hand of the products that we can be exporting, what do you think are the facilitations that could be offered by the government for the exporters to be increasing the exports in the next years?
Well, first of all, and foremost important is making it the policies a lot easier and more flexible. Making it easier to export as fast as possible, especially in the areas where there are perishable goods, where we have an advantage in fruits and vegetables and so on, and we've had an increase in that area. Making people understand the importance of export and how it feeds into our reserve of foreign currency and the importance of that. Also, one of the other things that have been, we've found over and over of a problem, most of our, coming back to our central bank, is controlling imports. Many of our unfortunate decisions have been controlling imports. We forget that a lot of the imports that we import go into industrial operations that results in exports. So if you control these, you end up controlling. So I would say easing the policies in imports on certain products, especially the ones that go into the parts of production that ends up with export on the other side. There's a whole cycle that you have to go through before saying I want to decrease imports and so on. Another thing that I think is we are on the verge is implementing a very simple but yet efficient law for small, medium and micro enterprises. And we've now have a new law still starting the implementation part, because again, a big part of the Egyptian economy depends on small, medium and micro enterprises. And also allowing them venues of contact with the world. Because you want these small enterprises to be able to actually communicate with people who want their products. So opening these markets for them is always very important. Another thing is always going to be maybe now with China slowing down, trying to look into, there's new needs in the market. The international market is dramatically changing. Many of the European countries and the more developed countries are noticing that dependence on China as one a very efficient, very strong economy was very useful. But now that we see that there is a slowness, you can look at the sensors market, for example. Cars, companies are unable to produce cars because sensors are late in China. So there are new opportunities in the international market that we need to study that have evolved because of the past couple of years and the slowness that happened in China. And we should be looking into replacing these opportunities in the market and looking at where these problems or disadvantages are happening due to China's slowness and jumping in and trying to build a name for ourselves. Again, this is not very easy. I mean, it's a lot easier said than done because the market is definitely very competitive.
A couple of points you've mentioned, Doctor, I would like to highlight. One of them is the flexibility between the government and the private sector. How would you assess the amount of flexibility and the flexibility that we didn't see before 2010 or 2011? Do you think it has changed since 2014 and up to now under the tenure of President Al-Sisi?
I think there is a lot of understanding of the importance of the private sector. I think there is still there is a lot of empowerment that's given to the private sector. Do I think it's enough? I would tell you definitely not. We need more. We need to understand that the private sector should be leading the economy in terms of production, service, agriculture, and so on. Is not a partner, but should be the leader of the economy. Again, it all depends on your vision, your political vision of if we are truly to believe that capitalism is going to be the future of this country. Capitalism depends mainly on the private sector and the market competitions and the government role diminishing as much as possible. So over time, yes, we are in the right direction. Have we seen empowerment to the private sector? Yes. But we expect more. And the more and the faster we are able to integrate the private sector into operations and offer the private sector trust, financing, and the ability to find infrastructures is very important. Allocating, for example, land is becoming very hard. One of the things that I was happy to read is the change of the whole registration process, the whole process of allocating land to investors, which to make it flexible. I mean, we compete with countries in the world where you file an application, and in 1 week you already own the land, you own the production site, they're producing and exporting. Another part that I think has not been utilized lately, although it has been actually initiated by President Sisi, has been the international trade area in Suez Canal. We started with opening a new section of Suez Canal. Hopefully, this place would change to become an industrial hub for logistics, for a lot of industrial activities. I think we have a ripe place, but we haven't used it enough. And it can be that President Sisi is going to do everything. I mean, he at least sets the goals, and there needs to be a lot of more operations that are on the ground. And in that area, he's already set. We've already set the branch of the, if we can call it the branch of Suez Canal, but I haven't seen the utilization of the area, because it is, whether we like it or not, we are in the center of the world. And our logistical abilities are endless, but we're not using it enough. We see other countries of the world that are, I mean, we have so many ports, we have so many facilities to connect areas of the world that is unique to us, that is God given to us, and it's only for us to use. So again, definitely there is an empowerment to the private market, but there needs to be more of that. The more you trust the private sector, the more you integrate it into the economy, the more the benefit to the economy as a whole. Because again, we can't do the old government does, government provide, government subsidize everything. This business model, I think, is outdated. And I think the will is there. It's the implementation processes that needs a little bit push.
A very important point, the private sector to be leading the Egyptian economy. But do you think it can be taking the risk nowadays, because there is, firstly, the coronavirus pandemic happened between 2019 and up till now, and then the Russian war against Ukraine. So do you think they could be taking the risk, the businessmen, the private sector, to be leading a big economy like Egypt's?
Yes, I think, yes. I think the answer also to your question is that you don't, it's not a turnkey project. It's not going to happen that you say private sector, so tomorrow the private sector will be in. This is a vision.
So it takes time.
It takes a long period of time to do that. You're changing the culture. Again, we have to look at where we're coming from. Our roots, whether we like it or not, has been in socialism for very many years. Changing cultures is something that is very hard to do. And therefore, what we can do today is the seed for the future. The problem with economic choices and economic changes and things like this is that you only get the benefit of it over periods of years. So when you look, for example, you've just mentioned 7 years or 8 years of presidential time, you can see it as a whole. You cannot see that you take a decision and the impact is tomorrow. And therefore, it is very important to set a direction. And as I've always said, you don't ride a bus, but you find a destination. And then once you get to that destination and you know you want to get there, you start riding the transportation. So I like the idea that we have a goal now for export. I like that we want private sector in. These are the goals. These are the visions for the future. These will happen over a period of time, an extended period of time. And for us to do that, it's now about the executive government side to set the policies and rules to go to that destination.
So we're on the right track economically?
Yes, I think we are. And the faster we are able to make the changes, the faster we'll get to our goals. Maybe the 5 years I said might be 3, might be 4, but definitely it needs the start. And the belief of the political leadership in this side of the world is very important, followed by the understanding of the executive arm of the importance of this, and then implementation. And once we start doing this in this order, things will happen. And I hope that it will happen quickly because there is no other way, unfortunately.
But to be making changes, you mentioned, Doctor, the political leadership, the vision, the path itself, the goals, for example. But on the other hand, you mentioned a very important point, the citizens, the people, millions of people, to be changing their cultures from one system to another. Do you think it is going in the right direction for these to be changing the culture of people?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that it is happening. Because we like it or we don't, it is happening. And there is definitely a lot of resistance from, not only from the people, actually from the employees and governments themselves, who are benefiting, even not benefiting, just comfortable with the status quo of the ongoing system. Change is dangerous, change is hard for people all the time. And it's one of the hardest things for people to accept and adhere to. But to change, you have to educate people. Not educate, I'm not talking about the bachelor, I'm not talking, but educating people about why are we changing, the reason for change, what is the future like if we don't change, what are the benefits of what we're doing. If people understand, then it's a lot easier to change instead of a top-down approach of saying, tomorrow we're going to be doing this. Well, we don't know why are we doing this. We have no clue. Why are we doing it? Why are we changing it? It used to work. Why change something that used to work, at least in the mind of the person who used to operate? And the degree of change we're talking about is major. Convincing people that there's no more need for governmental employees. Convincing people that there is no need for subsidies. That things are going to be sold at their own. And I forgot to mention that. These were great strides that today, I know people are unhappy with prices of electricity, for example. But at least today, in the past, everybody was getting the subsidy of electricity. Rich and poor were getting electricity as a cheap price. Today, we've changed that. And this was another thing that we should have talked about, the change of subsidy from in-kind subsidy to more cash subsidy, which is a very simple approach because as we did before in petroleum, gas, and electricity and water, we used to subsidize these things and we used to offer them at a lower price. Well, everybody benefited. Whether you were needy or you were rich or filthy rich, you got electricity at a low price.
Yes.
Well, today electricity is expensive. So number one, we started understanding to take care of our usage of energy because it is expensive. Number two, if the government can screen and find the list of needy people, then give them cash subsidy for the needy people.
To be protecting
Exactly.
those brackets.
This is very important, and I think the government is doing a great job in trying to protect the low-end earners in the market. But we're not supposed to protect everybody, which we used to do in the old in-kind subsidy. And we used to see also problems in the markets, especially flour. We used to see people, the bread got smaller and smaller and the flour was being funneled into the more expensive markets. So I think all of these changes are happening. And they are very strong changes. As you said, it's very hard for people. We see a lot of resistance. However, looking into the economy and the industry and the political part, the only change that is required now that will carry all of this will take the whole increase that's needed or the betterment that's increasing is actually education. Because again, we have a society that is 100 million plus, 60% below 30 years old, which is a great asset if you teach them well, if you train them well. And they're a great liability if you actually don't do that. And so we need to work on our youth. And again, as we said, it is a long-term project. If we don't educate, and I use the word educate and I didn't use the word universities or schools. Because over the years, we have a very odd situation, which is not helping anybody. We have doctors, engineers, and we have no employees. And we've seen many, many cases in Egypt today of people who are graduating from universities and not finding jobs, ending
Yes.
up working as a driver, ending up working in a mechanic job, ending in a lot more jobs. So another thing that I think needs to make sure, again, also that this export revolution, and that's my term, happen is vocational training. We need to start moving back to having vocational training. We need to end this everybody goes to university. People don't like what I'm going to say.
That's
but
a whole different
again,
culture.
But exactly, that's changing the culture. And we need to start understanding that equal. Yeah, my brother lives in Canada in a very, very nice place, very, very fancy place. His neighbor is a car mechanic because that's a respected job. What we have is unfortunately,
And he could make the same income.
He might be even making more.
Yes.
And my brother works in a top-notch IT company. And that's respected, that's respected. Now in Egypt, we unfortunately have these different measurements of human beings depending on their job. Today, we called a plumber engineer, unfortunately.
Yes.
And we all do it all the time without even thinking, what does that mean? It means that plumber is very valuable. Carpenter is very valuable. And I'm talking about experienced.
Yes.
Good ones who have the good training, the ability to produce what is needed outside. So without the move to vocational training, I think you will end up with nothing. This is a very important part of the plan, I hope, of the and enough university graduates. We have more than we need. So that's all educating the people and changing the culture. And this takes a lot of conflict and a lot of resistance.
Yes, and heading, Doctor, to the other part of the daily debate for tonight, which is the second report for the episode for tonight. It's coming from the growth rates of Egypt, the expected growth rates for 2022, which could be hitting about 6.2%. We'll be having more details in the upcoming report.
Exports increased by 20% in the first quarter 1Q of 2022 compared to the same period in 2021, despite the global crisis. The announcement was made during a meeting of Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli with the heads of export councils to discuss proposals to double the country's exports. Egypt has already achieved a noticeable increase in the field of exports, but the government looks forward to achieving leaps in exports. Egypt's non-oil exports reached an all-time high of $32.1 billion in 2021, up from $25.4 billion reached in 2020, an increase of 26%. The Prime Minister said that the government views the current global crisis as an opportunity to work on some tracks, foremost of which is the industry and export sector. He also instructed to prepare with the export councils general worksheets, one of each council, on how to double the export rates. Furthermore, the Prime Minister directed to speed up the announcement of the available industrial zones, the mechanisms of allocating them by the user-fract system and the respective payment system, in addition to the necessary procedures to obtain the license. Madbouli's directives comes in line with Egypt's efforts to provide more facilities for investors and raise the private sector's engagement in the economy to 65% within 3 years, up from the current 30%. These measures are part of a broader plan Madbouli announced to cope with the current global economic crisis resulting from the coronavirus pandemic and the Russian-Ukrainian war. A comprehensive development plan for the system of procedures and services provided by the Industrial Development Authority. The plan aims to grant more facilities to investors in various industrial sectors in line with the state's plan to attract more local and foreign investments in the industrial sector with the aim of raising GDP, providing jobs, and deepening local.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate, and I am honored to be having with me in the studio for tonight Dr. Khaled Dahawy, the Professor of Accounting at the American University in Cairo. We were speaking about the investment laws as well, or the legislation in general that are related to the economy and the economic benefits for the future. How do you see this process that took place in the past, as I mentioned, the 7 or 8 years, to be having better legislation for the economy?
I think we have to make sure of two things. One of the things that in the past we were very, I don't want to say proud, but we used to have a lot of legislation. And every time we produce legislation, we say that this legislation is to better the economy. This is a very bad practice, because if you don't study your legislation and the example and the goals and the results of your legislation before producing it, and then coming back 6 months later or a year or 2 years later and changing it, this brings a lot of problems in terms of the trust of the world into, or the foreign investors into the Egyptian economy. I'm happy to see more stability. There's more study. We have a lot of our planning side is working a lot better. Our investment laws, I think, are important. But one of the things that we're still lacking, actually, in our investment law is a focus on Upper Egypt. For many, many years, for some reason, we like the North. We focus our exports on the North, Europe and the US. We focus our investment on the north of Egypt. The south of Egypt is where we have a problem. And investment laws need to strengthen in that area. Definitely there is a better implementation of our investment laws. Today we see an investment, the GAFI Association, Investment Authority, is actually operating across different places. We see technology coming into play, which helps a lot on in the implementation. In my mind, very little is important in terms of laws and policy. More important is looking into the implementation of them. Most of our laws are good laws, but their implementation is a problem. I'll give you a very simple, silly example. Our traffic laws have changed over and over again. But no time have you ever heard that there's a traffic law that says you are allowed to park in the wrong spot, or you're allowed to speed or overspeed. But it's always the implementation. We've always had a problem with the implementation. Our laws and regulations need to slow down. Our implementation needs to be upgraded. And the only way to upgrade implementation is human resources. In the past, they used to call it HR. Human resources. Today we talk about talent management and retention of good people, and how to keep people and how to upgrade the quality of the employee. When we start doing that, our laws will be more and more efficient and effective than changing the laws themselves. So yes, I agree that there has been strides in laws and legislation. There's always a lot of enforcement now. But without upgrading your human capital, you're always going to fall into, because anybody who implements the law is a human being. And if you don't upgrade that, you have a problem. And unfortunately, the laws and the law requirements is very different than the actual implementation on the ground. That gap requires investment in human capital. And if there is an investment that's highly needed in Egypt again and again, and I know I keep going to the back and back to the same thing, but it's because I really have a strong belief in that. In that our major failure has been in the implementation in this human capital. And 60%, again, I'm repeating the number, I know I said it again, 60% below 30 years old is a great fortune if you use it well.
On the other hand, you mentioned, Doctor, the importance of investments, the foreign direct investments. They total about 5.5 or 5.4 billion American dollars in 2021, which marks that we are the third biggest Arab country in the region to be receiving foreign direct investments. Can we be having better numbers for 2022 in this field?
The answer is definitely yes. And again, it comes to the idea of trust. We have depended on what's been called the hot money in the past in terms of a couple of years. And I am very proud of our Minister of Finance because he admitted the error of depending on that. And I think it is about time to understand that without foreign direct investment, our economy will fail. There is no way that we are going to be able to sustain the growth in population, the growth of the challenges that we meet without foreign direct investment. We need someone to come and invest in Egypt. And if we're going to want people to come to invest in Egypt, there is a list of securities. There are countries that have better experiences than we have. And I'm not looking at the Arab countries, of course, because there is a big gap between us and other Arab countries. But we need to learn. And one of the things that I love is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like in the past, they used to send scientific explorations to countries that had a better education. Used to go to France, to England, where they would learn and come back. We need to do something like this. We see the top 5 countries that have sustained, and the word is sustained, because again, you have hikes all the time, but sustainable foreign direct investment. Which are the top 5 countries? We send a group of our top in that area, people, and they study what have this country done in the past 5 to 10 years. And we start formulating from the 5 years policies, a policy of ours. With again, as we've said, in $100 million in export, and we're going to look and be accountable for that. Well, then there needs to be another goal for FDIs. We need this FDI by such an amount. This is going to be our goal. If we're going to set this as our goal, then what do we do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And definitely one of the biggest issues in Egypt has been trust in the government and the economy, which negates change and speed of change in laws, definitely. We need to slow down in legislation and start improving implementation of the already legislated laws. Because if you change the laws all the time, you have a problem with that the person who's coming from outside to see your economy is unable to sustain what's going on. Because everybody who comes, and if we talk about foreign direct investment, we're talking about someone who did their homework. Foreigners do more homework than we do. Before they come and invest here, they do 2 things. Number 1, they check the international market. They find a competitive place to invest. Number 2, they do their feasibility study. So if you change the law on them in that process, you end up with a completely problematic implementation of the plan they've planned. And it takes, by the way, these decisions are not 1 or 2 years. These companies that are going to give us foreign direct investment, especially in industry, are going to be requiring a stable economy and legislation for quite a while.
And they could be losing trust in our market for years to come.
Yes. And that's a big problem, because if you lose trust once, and you know, now with communication channels, everything is open.
Yes.
You can't hide anything. So it's very, very important for us to build trust in our economy, as we've built it in our political regime. And again, stop bothering with legislation. Let's work on I would say, efficient and effective implementation of the current legislation.
Of what we have.
Exactly.
Yes, Professor Dr. Khaled Dahawy, the Professor of Accounting at the American University in Cairo. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate. Anytime. And this brings us to the end of the Daily Debate for tonight. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
ماشي في الطريق أو قاعد مع صديق، وانت بره مصر أو جوه مصر،